All right, so this is our first presentation on our new unit entitled The Stress Emotions. And hopefully you all remember that there are two stress emotions, anger and fear. So within this section, we're going to be doing a little deeper dive into anger, how it manifests within each of us, how we manage our anger. And then with this other stress emotion, fear, we'll be looking more closely at that process that we tend to just call worry. And so let's go ahead and get it going. We're going to be starting with the anger section first. And just to lay a foundation here, I'd like to go back to something that we discussed in the very first section that we were covering with lecture. We talked about how stress can affect all aspects of our well-being. And with regard to these stress emotions, we're talking about our emotional well-being. And once again, emotional well-being is defined this way: the ability to feel and to express the entire range of human emotions. Okay, so I think this part is kind of interesting because I have a hunch that some of us are better at allowing ourselves to feel certain emotions, and I also wonder if some of us are much more comfortable or skilled at expressing some emotions. So the idea, though, within emotional well-being is not only to allow ourselves to feel and express them, we want to also be able to manage or control these emotions and not allow ourselves to be controlled by them. Okay, so before we get going with anger, I wanted to talk a bit with you about what constitutes a healthy emotion. And from this more holistic perspective, we look at all emotions as being considered healthy. Um, because we're human beings, as humans, we're going to experience the whole spectrum of emotions. It's part of the way we're made up. So um, I remember a time in my life where I basically would say that I never felt angry. And really, what was going on, what for me was this denial of sorts, denying that I felt angry, or perhaps misinterpreting that feeling for something else. So, again, from this holistic perspective, it is considered healthy to experience or feel the entire range of emotions. And if we aren't doing that, there's perhaps a little bit of imbalance going on. Expressing emotions is also, another reason why it can be really important is it does allow us to release those feelings. And I want to backtrack a bit with expression. We want that expression to be appropriate. Um, I think if you reflect back on times where you've maybe expressed in an inappropriate way, you may have felt a temporary release. But if we're inappropriately expressing emotions, a lot of times the secondary emotion will follow up. It can be regret, it can be guilt, it can be shame. So the idea is that we're able to do this in a real appropriate, effective, helpful way. And when we do express in that way, what we experience, that release of the feelings, the term for that is called catharsis. So, we were just talking about the experiencing of all emotions is considered healthy. Appropriately expressing them is considered healthy. So, if we flip this around now and look at this question, are any types of emotions then considered to be unhealthy? The way unhealthy emotions get described is this way: as unresolved issues of anger or fear. So if we're experiencing anger, or if we happen to be experiencing fear, so in other words, those two stress emotions, and we're not able to work through it or resolve it or come to terms somehow with it, that's when an emotion can move from that healthy category to something we would describe as unhealthy. So we're looking in a lot of cases at maybe long-term anger or the inability to get past fearfulness and worry. Those would be unresolved and considered unhealthy. So these two stress emotions, anger and fear, they pretty perfectly line up with the fight flight response. So anger is considered the fight emotion, fear is considered the flight emotion. And when we talk about anger and fear can sometimes sound like pretty strong words. Like it might be easy to say, no, 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 I'm not angry. But what we might be experiencing is a shade of anger. So when we're talking about anger and fear, we're including all the shades of anger and fear. So shades of anger, and I'm very sure we've talked about this some in class. Shades of anger include irritation, frustration, impatience. Shades of fear, worry, nervousness, anxiety, doubt, overwhelm could fit in this category. So think about all of those. I guess they could be lighter shades or various shades of anger and fear. Those are all considered, right in here as stress emotions. So, if these stress emotions, if we're not able to resolve them or work through them, they can become prolonged or long term. And something that's important to understand is they can leave us very emotionally drained. Um, and I would imagine that most of us have experienced this at one time or another. And I think it's worth also mentioning they can leave us physically drained as well. So, kind of back to this, is it healthy or not? And these are these first two bullet points are just a couple of my perspectives on anger and fear and when we experience anger and fear. And the first one, is anger and fear or anger and fear considered to be healthy? And I've mentioned yes, they are definitely useful emotions, especially when they're used for their intended purpose, physical survival. Um, Anger is the fight emotion. Feeling angry might make us more capable of fighting if fighting was necessary to survive. Fear could be a useful emotion if it helped us escape or flee. It's the flight emotion. So, and again, that could be very important in terms of physical survival or being able to respond and um, move ourselves away from a dangerous situation. Another yes that I mentioned, and I feel pretty strongly about this. Anger and fear, when we experience those two emotions, I think that they can be great teachers. Um, if we'll take the time to reflect and examine and really try to understand why that particular emotion arose in me at this particular time. So, understanding what triggers or what causes anger to arise or what triggers and causes fear to arise, if we take the time to really explore that, we can get to know ourselves better. What's also, I think, very important is getting familiar with what causes them to dissipate or go away. So, um, examining after feeling angry, if it's now dissipated and you're no longer experiencing that, well, what helped you? What helped you move past that anger? What helped you move past that fear? So again, this is an area where if we can take the time to be reflective about these two emotions, we can learn a lot about ourselves. We can potentially grow a lot more and get much better at coping with them, or maybe even preventing them in the future. So again, anger and fear become unhealthy emotions when we hold on to them, when we do not appropriately release or express them, when we're unable to move on, or when they're unresolved. Okay, so we're going to be moving into anger much more specifically now. Uh, but before we do that, and before you move along to the next lecture, I want you to be sure and complete the two worksheets that I've posted. There's one worksheet that is posted that is entitled Anger Recognition Checklist. And it's going to ask you to be checking off the behaviors that kind of happen with you when you experience anger. It's also going to have you estimate approximately how many times a day that you experience anger, or it could be that you experience also one of the shades of anger. So you may not identify something as being full blown anger, but you might be able to say, you know what, yeah, I felt irritated, or I felt impatient, or aggravated, or pissed off. So really try to think about a typical day for you and how many times do you actually experience anger and use that as your estimate. And the second worksheet, I hope you guys have fun with this. Um, it's a questionnaire that is going to try to determine if you actually have a mismanaged anger style. So the first part of that is the questionnaire. The second page, it's actually going to guide you through calculating your results and determining if you fall into um, there are four different categories of mismanaged anger. You're going to find out, did you actually qualify to be in one of those mismanaged anger styles? And the other thing I wanted to let you know is it's not at all uncommon for people doing this questionnaire to sometimes fall into two of the mismanaged anger styles. So if your results show you land not just in one, but in two, that happens more often than not. So make sure you complete those questionnaires. They're simply for you, but have your results with you before you start the next presentation. And have fun with this, and I will talk with you next time.